Now I'm recording.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Mountain Year Farm Talk. My name is JJ Barrett. I'm the Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Wood County for West Virginia University Extension. And I have my guest host with the most, Evan, down in southern West Virginia. Evan, what's going on today?
Well, today is final days of camp for both my Wayne County and my Cabell County 4-H kids. So they've had a good week in Cowboy Lingo here in Barbersville, and so they're ready. I think they're ready to go home, and the parents might not be ready for them, but they're ready to go home, I think.
Yeah, I agree. We just finished up a horse camp here. We had 24 youths that came out to spend the week learning about their horses and 4-H camp traditions, and I think they're tired, and so am I. So, yeah, I'm sure that they were ready to go back home.
Yep.
But this week we have a special guest with us, and that is Brad Smith. He is the Ag and Natural Resource Extension Agent in Grant County. Brad, how are you today?
Doing good.
Good. Of course, Brad has worked on several projects with sheep and goats. I guess at least when I started, the small ruminant project was something that was going on in West Virginia, and then now the ram test and ram and buck test, similar to what we do like with the young sire evaluations. And Brad kind of does a lot of educational and extension work with small ruminants. Brad, before we get into some production management with lamb and kids, tell us a little about the small ruminant project that you worked on.
The small ruminant project was a collaborative project with Extension and the Davis College that had some legislative funding for 10 or 12 years it ran.
Oh, okay.
And that project started out on the eastern side of the state, east of the Allegheny Mountain Range, and then we expanded it to try to cover the whole state. With that, we did the research to get cedars approved, labeled, and approved for use in sheep. So that was one outcome of that project.
Now, was that for the so people could artificial inseminate? Was it mainly for sheep?
More towards synchronization.
Synchronization, okay.
For artificial insemination, but just to synchronize ewes to have a group lamb all at one time.
Okay. Well, how did that? Was that kind of the goal of that project, or what? Was there more of a lofty goal was to increase sheep and goat numbers in West Virginia, or did you have some other goals with that project?
The goal of that project was to increase the profitability of sheep and goats for producers across the state.
Okay. And Brad, how long have you been with West Virginia University?
I started in Wood County, JJ, back in 1988. So a long time.
Yeah, and you've always kind of focused on sheep and goats.
I've always had an interest and tried to support sheep and goat producers. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure that you've probably seen a lot of changes for sheep. I don't know, I guess during that period, numbers went down. Do you see an increase in sheep and goat numbers now here in West Virginia?
We do. West Virginia was recognized in the last sheep and goat ag statistics as the fastest growth in small ruminant and sheep. I think it was just sheep in fastest growth across the country. So we're actually seeing an increase.
Huh. Yeah, I know for years that the numbers kind of declined, but I guess in recent years, at least the last couple years, lamb and kid prices have been extremely high. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and how that's affecting the industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in small ruminants right now because of the economics and the value of those lambing kids. You were talking about 4-H activities and busy extension activities with Evan. We just finished up the 72nd annual West Virginia Sheep and Goat Show and Sale here in Petersburg last weekend. And while our numbers were down in the number of lots we had in the sale, we still had a really good show and sale. We do a lamb promotion. We do a lamb barbecue meal where we cooked about 300 pounds of boneless legs and served. This year, the sale had 88 lots of rams, ewes, and does. We had some goats, some meat goats in there that sold for $57,000.
Wow.
For $57,000. The rams actually averaged 700 and the ewes averaged 650 in that sale. So we had a really good sale with lots of interest. The numbers were down because of the prices that people could get at market. They just didn't keep a whole lot of animals back to put in the show and sale when they could get $4 a pound this spring at market price.
Right. I mean, I think that 60-pound lamb market is right around $4.50 to $5. Is that right?
Probably a 60-pound lamb is. I haven't looked lately. They came off a little bit after Easter, which is normal. We normally see those annual swings in price, but we don't expect as much variation in price as what we've seen in the past. They're gonna continue to stay strong.
Yeah, and Brad, let's dive into some of the meat of the discussion that we're talking about, especially with someone that's maybe getting into the industry that's got either, especially with sheep, but the same way with goat production. What would you recommend for people to do the traditional? We try to have lambs there for sale in March, which means that we'll have to do have some supplied feed. Or do you think that it's just a lot more profitable to try to raise these lambs and goats on grass?
Our biggest problem with sheep and goat production has always been predators and parasites. And when we're focusing on grass production, we're going to have problems with both of those issues. If we can learn to manage those problems, then yes, I think it can be more profitable to be a low input type operation that utilizes our forages and doesn't have high cost in feed. Traditionally, that's what West Virginia producers did, was lambed late spring and raised the animals on grass. And then because of the predator and parasite problems, we have switched to many producers lamb earlier in the winter and market those lambs when prices are traditionally at their highest point prior to Easter.
And I guess why let's talk about one of the problems with predation. What can some of our producers? I know that we have donkeys, guard dogs like Great Pyrenees. There's some other animals that have been used. What have you seen out there that works as to help with decreasing predator losses in sheep and goats?
It's on an individual basis what works best for that farm, that operation, that producer. Guard dogs are probably the most common. I've seen a lot of donkeys and llamas. Just simply running the sheep with multi-species grazing, cows and calves, or larger animals, horses, donkeys, That tends to deter some of the predators. Fencing, now with electric fence, we can deter a lot of the predators.
Yeah, is it always the Great Pyrenees dogs? I know that they kind of look, they're white, look kind of cute and cuddly, but I guess they can be pretty tough. But is that the only guard dog? Are there some other ones that we use?
No, there's a lot of other breeds that are used. The Pyrenees are probably the most common. They've done some research trials with guard dogs at Texas A&M for several years now, and we have a lot of producers across the U.S. looking at some of the other breeds of guard dogs that are more aggressive than the Pyrenees even. And that depends on your situation, where you're located, what kind of guard animal you may want on your operation. If you live next to a park or a school with kids around, there's always that threat of someone getting bit or hurt. So you need to be cognizant and aware of that.
Yeah, I heard the donkeys though there's of course anything in life there's plus and minuses. Do the donkeys work pretty good? I've heard that if you get more than one though, that they sometimes will go off by themselves. Are there the donkeys or llamas work pretty good too?
Yep, they can. That's normally a problem, yes, when we have donkeys at home and when we segregate the donkey and the sheep, she does a pretty good job of staying with them and protecting them. Has access or fence line contact to the horses or cows, she tends to want to stay with them and not stay with the sheep.
Brad, we do have a question here from the audience. If a producer is getting started, what type of industry associations are available to join in West Virginia in the state, or regional groups or national groups as well?
Okay. Not knowing where they're from, regional may be a little difficult, but your extension agent can help you identify if there are any regional groups close. Statewide, we have the West Virginia Shepherds Federation, which is an affiliate of the American Sheep Industry Association, the national organization. So that, even though the name designates sheep, they also are the national organization for the goat producers as well, sheep and goats. The American Sheep Industry Association has a really in-depth website, a lot of references up there. The West Virginia Shepherds Federation has a website. You can Google that and find that. Right now, we're struggling with reorganizing after COVID shut down, and getting that website and that organization running efficiently again, up to date. We just met with the West Virginia Shepherds Federation at the sheep show and sale here in Petersburg last weekend and elected a new board of directors from throughout the various regions across the state. Have a new chairman or new president of that association is Kent Greenleaf. So there is some information on the web as well about them, but it's a little bit outdated. There's membership forms on there that are current. You can pull up a membership form and send that in to Joe Ackerman, is the treasurer.
Okay. Yeah, I've got on the West Virginia Shepherds Federation website. They've got some good information on there. I know that as far as some of the activities may be a little outdated. Brad, let's head into talk a little bit about with sheep and goats. If we have anyone out there that has not raised those before, there is a learning curve, especially with castrating or banning animals, and also with what we call enterotoxemia. We've got to give that type C and D shot or vaccine to the lamb, especially lambs and kids get that can you talk a little bit about recommendations for giving those overeating shots, the C&D toxoid, and then about some good advice on banding? I mean, I guess we can still castrate, but either banding or castrating and then giving that tetanus shot.
Yep. On working baby lambs, the one vaccine that is recommended across the country is the common name is overeating disease, Clostridium perfringens, and we need to vaccinate for type C and D. And I always recommend including the tetanus in that. So you can buy one product that's CD and T, and give a vaccination. Now, as far as when you need to vaccinate, that depends. If your ewes were vaccinated and are providing immunity to the lambs and kids, then they have coverage for the first 2 to 3 weeks of life. You don't need to vaccinate as early. If you haven't vaccinated, and that's the best route to go, is vaccinate ewes annually a month prior to lambing or kidding, and then those babies are protected. If you haven't done that, then we need to vaccinate those lambs and kids at an early age, normally a week to 10 days of age. And then that vaccine requires a booster 3 to 4 weeks later. For goat kids, we recommend giving a second booster. So they actually require 3 shots of CD and T.
Okay. But you're saying for your ewes and does, it pays off to go ahead and vaccinate them about a month before they're going to have their lambs or kids. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then a week to 10 days for the after they're born, and then another one dose for the kids.
Right. Well, the lambs require a booster. The goat kids require 2 boosters, so 3 shots for the goats. And if the ewes have been vaccinated, you don't need to do that quite as quickly. You can wait till they're a month old, six weeks old to get that first shot in them.
Okay. And what's the for some of our inexperienced people out there, especially when you first, at least when I was in high school and first got sheep, what are the symptoms of overeating disease?
That's the problem is there really isn't much advanced warning. There isn't any symptoms early on. You're just going to find your fastest growing, best doing animals dead in the pen. It tends to be more of a problem when we change feed, when we stress the young animals is when it's going to show up. So you try to prevent, if you're feeding a creep feed, don't let the creep feeders run empty, and then let lambs have full access and go in and overeat on that feed. Some management things like that can help prevent it, but all the animals really need to be vaccinated.
Okay, is it more of a danger if you're feeding some grain or a problem?
Normally it is.
Okay. For castrating or what do you recommend for? You recommend banding or still the old-fashioned castration for lambs and kids, and at what age?
Okay, again, the younger you can do them up, we don't want to do them newborn. We want to get them nursing and started good for a couple of days, but normally a week to 10 days, we try to dock and castrate baby lambs. The goats, a lot of times we'll let the males intact until later. It's less stressful the younger we do it, but with goats, especially male goats, we have problems with urinary calculi. So basically they develop kidney stones and can't urinate. So if we let them intact as bucks for longer, that reproductive tract develops a little bit larger and we don't have as much problem with that. So goats is a little bit later in life. As far as tools to use, you mentioned, it's up to the producer. You need to think about time of year. Banding works fine. I think people use that tool for the wrong reason. A lot of our new producers don't want to actually use a scalpel and cut the bottom third of the scrotum off and pull the testicles out and see blood. They think they're hurting the animal. I think the bands are probably more stressful than actually castration is, because that band is cutting off the blood supply for a long period of time over several days. And then that scrotum or that tail that you've banded is decaying tissue that's hanging on that lamb for a couple weeks before it falls off. It's imperative, if we use bands, to make sure they're vaccinated for tetanus ahead of time.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that.
The other thing is this time of year, if you have lambs born late spring, you're utilizing a grass-based production approach, and you get lambs into get dock and castrate at this time of year, you need to be concerned about fly strike. So bands aren't the best option this time of year, definitely.
What and fly strike? What will we, if you have an animal that gets that? What are some of the symptoms?
Normally, you're just going to find an animal that is listless, not alert, not doing well. If you look closely, you'll notice what appears to be a wet spot on the wool or on the animal, and in close observation, you're going to notice some maggots eating into the flesh of that animal. So once flies lay eggs, and that's the whole reason that we have to dock to begin with, is just for sanitation, keep that area clean. If the tail gets full of manure or urine, flies are going to lay eggs there. And maggots are only supposed to eat dead flesh, but they haven't read the textbook. They'll eat right into the lamb and flesh as they go.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about the as far as docking. Do you recommend banding, or just go ahead and do the old-fashioned clamp or verdisos and just cut that thing off?
What I like the best for docking is an electric docker. That's what we utilize. It's a heating element that gets hot, so that, and it's pointed. It's not necessarily sharp, but it's a pointed heating element that cuts through the tail and cauterizes at the same time.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that prevents a lot of bleeding, and actually may be better for the animal.
And it's personal preference. An elastrator works. The elastrator bands work. The emasculator has a crushing edge and a cutting edge that you can dock tails with that as well. Verdesios and a knife work. There's lots of different tools utilized.
JJ,
I'll go ahead.
sorry, I had a phone call. I'm not sure if you took care of the chat questions real quick. We did have a question related to this issue. So you've answered yet. The tail docking is necessary for wool breeds. And does the club lamb docking increase prolapse?
Okay, when they talk about club lamb docking, if they are docked excessively close, then it can increase the incidence of rectal prolapse. There's lots of other factors that affect that. There's some genetic factors. The environment that they're in affects that. If they're feeding a dusty feed and you have lambs confined in a lot that maybe doesn't have the best air quality, they're coughing, that's going to increase the incidence of rectal prolapse. So there's lots of things that play into that. But yes, we went through a period of many years with the tail dock rule in West Virginia for the sheep and the lamb shows, the market lamb shows, and the breeding sheep, where animals, the American Veterinary Medical Association recommends they be docked distal end of the caudal tail fold. So that's the web that it connects from the rectum to the tail. It's very obvious when you look at a lamb before it's docked where that web ends. But once you cut that tail off, you can no longer tell whether that was docked at that point or not. So it was an issue to police and a problem in the show industry. The shows are encouraging the most extreme animal. And when we're looking at production, we want to stay more middle of the road. We want to produce, depending on your goals, heavy muscled, good carcass that's going to bring a premium. But we're not focusing on the heaviest muscled animal. And that docking is just a visual illusion that helps make the animal look heavy muscled if it doesn't have that tail back there.
Okay, awesome. I know that was a big controversy here a few years ago when that rule kind of got changed again. Where is the best place to buy sheep? And do you know of local shearers or how they can go about finding information out on finding a shearer or how to get trained in shearing sheep?
Okay, that's a big problem across the country. Both the ASI, the American Sheep Industry, and the West Virginia Shepherds web pages have some resources on shearing. They list shearers that are available. Locally, we're having fewer and fewer folks shear in the state. As far as training, we try to do a couple of every year. This year we did a sheep shearing school at Potomac State in conjunction with their Animal Science 251 lab. And we had some local producers come in and join us for the day that wanted to learn how to shear. We can set up some shearing schools in different areas of the state and provide that training. If the interest is there, talk to your extension agents, let them know, and have them get a hold of me. We can help identify some people to teach a shearing school.
Awesome, that'd be great.
Brad, is there any maybe a good central location for finding shears? Is there something on the West Virginia Shepherds Federation website, or maybe we could create something on one of the extension websites for that? A list of shears.
Already is available on the Shepherds Federation website, okay, but it's a little outdated. It needs updated. I will say that. And the American Sheep Industry Association has a listing of shearers as well.
Right. I think kind of on the local level here in the Mid-Ohio Valley, there's a couple shearers down in Jackson County, a couple of younger fellas, and then they kind of try to schedule to have hit several farms in an area that they go to. But you're exactly right. There's very hard to find somebody close that shear.
The one thing, talking about shearing, the biggest expense is the travel and setup for the shearer. And if we can work together, producers and extension can help organize a shearing day at a certain farm for our smaller flock owners, could haul them to a farm and meet the shearer. Right. That would be really beneficial for them.
I mean, would it just spitballing here, but it would be better to use maybe some of our county fairgrounds or 4-H campgrounds to have where if we set the shears up, then we'd have kind of a central location everybody could come to.
Yep. Those kind of, some of our local auction barns may even have a place that we can utilize. But yes, fairgrounds, or a producer's farm. But then we also have to be cognizant of biosecurity and not spreading disease. So a fairgrounds or someplace other than a producer's operation may be the best place.
And on the Facebook side, Noah Cummings, he commented, he recommended Wyatt Hilty for professional shearing for people in West Virginia. That's who they're recommending is Wyatt to come do that.
Okay.
And we have a couple more questions here in the chat. Back to the dogs. What was the best way to keep our dogs from barking and running at the sheep?
They really need to be grown and developed with the sheep. So you would get a pup and start them. It takes a little bit of attention every day to train a dog, whether it's a livestock protection dog or whether it's a working stock dog. It takes a little bit of attention every day. The sheep normally bond with the pup, and the pup bonds with sheep very quickly if they are weaned and raised with them. The big problem is we have both extremes. You have producers that don't want to make too much of a pet out of your livestock guard dog. Otherwise, it's going to always be at the house wanting attention and not stay with sheep. And you have the other extreme where producers don't pay any attention to them and they stay with the sheep well, but then you can't catch or manage the dogs. So you have to find a balance there to be able to handle them, take care of the dogs, but yet still have them want to bond and stay with the sheep.
Awesome.
The Brad, before we move on any further, we have to go ahead and get this out of the way. The great debate, especially not so much with the goats, but with the sheep. The hair sheep versus the wool breeds. I know that traditionally, for our fat lambs, the fat lamb market is that 120 to 130 pound meaty. Not always either a cross or a Hamp or a Suffolk. But over the last 20 years, hair sheep have really come on because of we don't have to shear them, and they are somewhat parasite resistant. Do you see them as the future for new producers, or do you see where there's a mix of maybe either hair sheep use on a traditional like a Dorset or Suffolk ewe, or vice versa? What's your opinion on that?
The hair sheep are the fastest growing breed in the industry. Katahdins are the fastest growing breed, which is a type of hair sheep. Every breed has its advantages and its disadvantages. The hair sheep work well for our beginning producers. They, as far as disadvantages, they grow much slower and are not nearly as heavily muscled. So they don't have as desirable of carcass when we go to that end point. We can see variations within any breed and select for traits that are important to us. So we have several breeds now that are selecting for parasite resistance. The Katahdins are noted for being more parasite resistant, but you have both extremes within any breed. So you have to watch out. The one question earlier was where to find sheep. And my recommendation is, if you want to raise sheep in a pasture-based setting, low-cost production system, then you need to buy them from a producer that's raising them that way. If you want to get into raising club lambs and selling club lambs, then you need to buy from a club lamb producer that is raising them the way you want to. Identify the producer that has similar goals, and then look at the individual sheep. And my recommendation would be to to try to buy a group of animals from one producer initially, rather than going to a livestock auction or a purebred show and sale, where you're buying a couple individuals from this place and a couple more from that place. You're going to be disappointed when you take them home and turn them out on grass, because they've been fed and maintained normally on a high energy diet with some grain.
Yeah, Brad, the Katahdins, I guess one of the main advantages is that they're going to just shed that hair instead of having to pay somebody to shear them. But what is the? I don't think maybe someone that never had sheep or goats realizes that. How long does it take for that to shed off, that for the hair sheep?
They're going to shed annually in the spring, normally April, May, and it varies. Some of them will shed off real quick, and some of them won't shed off completely anyhow. I mean, year round. Some of those, and you had mentioned utilizing a hair cross on some of our traditional wool breeds. That's a problem, because when you do that, then you have to shear annually, and that wool is of no value. You need to throw it away.
Oh, okay. I mean, if you use that like as a terminal cross, I think someone said they used a Dorset ram on some Katahdins. Would you have to shear those lambs that you're going to raise up and sell, or just depending on if you're going to sell them as lambs or to the fat market?
If you're selling them as lambs, you don't need to shear. Normally they're going to be, it depends on how you manage them again, but normally the advantage to a confinement type operation on feeding a high energy diet is those lambs will reach market weight before they're 6 months old. In a pasture-based production setting, they're going to grow much slower, and a lot of times they need to be marketed prior to being a year of age. At about a year of age is when the carcass looks at the break joint to determine maturity, and the value of a lamb versus mutton changes when that break joint fuses. So, and you're looking about normally half of the value of lambs versus mutton. So you need to get them marketed by the time they're a year old, and we can do that on grass, but you may need to shear in a grass-based setting if they're running all summer in the heat.
Any information on people who can wash the wool properly?
Wash it?
Yes.
That's one of those niche markets that I haven't been involved in too much. There are some good YouTube videos out there. You can find some resources on washing and preparing a fleece for hand spinning or other crafts. A lot of the wool is worsted, so it's fused together. That they have the needlepoint crafts that they utilize wool for, and that kind of uses a worsted product. And there are some resources out there on the internet.
Yeah, Brad, the
big interest at WVU right now. We may have to get Lisa on here to update us on that a little bit, but there are some of the students and faculty in the College of Design, in the Division of Design, that are looking into wool processing and developing fibers, different fabrics to utilize.
cool.
And JJ, we have one last question in the chat for now. Go ahead and get
Go ahead.
done for we lose them. For pasture-based production, what are some options to market or sell? Regular stock markets, or are there other resources?
There are other resources. Your local stock markets tend to be places where the buyers buy up the lambs and haul them to a terminal market and resell them, not getting to that end user. So you can recoup a little bit more of that income if you get them in the hands of the end user or a little bit closer down the line. There are some opportunities. Right now in the US, the biggest markets that seem to be where the slaughter facilities are going to get the majority of their lambs are in New Holland, Pennsylvania, and New Hope, Ohio. Those markets see thousands of lambs a week. And my caution there is you can look at market reports. A lot of times when the market is real high, everybody sees that market report. And then the next week we have a glut of lambs at those markets and the market's depressed. So watch making market decisions on that. The ethnic market here in the East is our biggest market, and we have a lot of different endpoints that they can utilize, anywhere from what we used to term as a hothouse lamb, a 60-pound weaned lamb, not even weaned. We just take them to market right off the ewe or doe and sell them at a lightweight. At Easter time, at Christmas time, there's a demand for those kind of lambs. The ethnic holidays change throughout the year for the Muslim holidays and several of the others. So you need to look at when those holidays are falling, and normally the markets are highest right before one of those holidays.
Yeah, Brad, there's going to be a big difference for our listeners out there between raising those lambs in the feed yard or in the barn and out on pasture. Tell us a little bit about what their strategy should be for deworming lambs that are out on pasture. I mean, is there a set times that we should do that? Or, because I know that we try to use FAMACHA as much as possible, but does that carry water for lambs and kids?
It does. Yeah, I want to mention the FSA grant and workshops that Extension is working on across the state. And we get into that in a lot more depth than we'll be able to here. But I'll get to that and cover your question here after I talk about the different sessions. We've done sheep and goat sessions. That grant really looked at kind of alternative ag topics for underserved populations, and was able to buy supplies for the various topics. The sheep and goat topics, we've done one in about half of the area so far. The other half's coming up. We're trying to do them in each of the conservation districts across the state. So I know you did one back early in Little Canal, and Western has done theirs down in Jackson. Monongalia District did theirs. Potomac Valley has done theirs. West Fork has done theirs in the center part of the state. Elk has done theirs. And the Southern I did last week down in Mercer County. The ones we've got coming up, June 25th, the Tigris Valley District is going to be doing one there in Barber County. So if you live in that area of the state and can get there, you want to contact Jody Carpenter to get registered. The Greenbrier Valley District is going to do one in Monroe. So you need to contact Brian Wickline to get registered. That's coming up the 29th of June. July 7th is in the Eastern Panhandle. Up in Jefferson County, you need to contact Emily Mara. July 8th is the Northern Panhandle. in Ohio County, you need to contact Karen Cox. And July 10th is the Guyon District down in Cabell County, and Evan will take registrations for that workshop. At those workshops, we focus on the needs of the audience, but the one common focus has been on the FAMACHA training and parasite management.
Yeah, Brad, is there a, or should I, Lisa, is there a, on the main WVU website, is there a list of all these times and places for the FSA training, these small ruminant workshops?
I don't think there's a list on the website currently, but that's something we could add. I think it's mainly been your local county extension office doing the promotion of the upcoming trainings through the newsletters.
Okay. That's
And
good.
we have to mention with those trainings, there are, through the grant, there are supplies that are provided, but it's limited. With limited resources, we have to limit it to like the first 20 registered or something close to that in each of the areas. So
That sounds great.
And I put the link to mine coming up in July. It's in the chat box, but
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have it on our extension website. This is Brandy. That would just be another outreach outlet for us if we can get it up there, Lisa.
Yeah, that's that would be awesome. Also, Brad, what is your contact? Tell us what your phone and email is to get a hold of you.
okay, to get a hold of me, my email is brad.smith@mail.wvu.edu, or you can call the Grant County Extension Office at 304-257-4688.
Okay, great. Now, Brad, you have to answer the question about the deworming these lambs and kids that are on pasture.
Yep. The whole FAMACHA program and that training is to help people realize the biggest problem we have with the parasites now is they have all developed resistance to the anthelmintics we utilize. There aren't going to be any new anthelmintics available in the US because of the cost of labeling those products and the FDA process to make sure they're safe. So we have to utilize what we have to the best of our ability. And the only way we can do that is through selective deworming. So there is no longer the recommendation that we deworm lambs and kids monthly, that we deworm all of the lambs and kids monthly. What we ought to be doing is still checking monthly to see which animals need to be dewormed and just treating those individuals. Right now, most of the recommendations are recommending that we use 2 different classes of dewormers when we deworm on each individual animal. So we don't want to deworm the whole group. You're never going to get rid of all the parasites. And when you do that, the only parasites that are left in your system are those that have developed some resistance to those products.
Right. I know that some of the producers still, especially for kids and lambs, because they're more young and susceptible, they will try to maybe deworm a couple times. But do you recommend against that, or to go ahead and at least deworm those once when they're out? And how old would they be?
The one recommendation where I recommend deworming everything is on the ewes just prior to lambing or at partition. We see even in wintertime lambing, the worms overwinter in the animal in a resting state. So they're not active, they're not causing damage, they're not going to be affected by the anthelmintics we drench them with until they go through this process where they're becoming active again, and stress causes that. So partition and lactation, the energy demands on the ewe more than double from maintenance to lactation. So those stresses make those worms active again. And at that point, I still recommend deworming all the ewes. The rest of the time, we ought to be evaluating FAMACHA scores. The main parasite that causes us problems in our humid environment is Haemonchus contortus, the barber pole worm. And that parasite is a blood-sucking parasite that makes the animals anemic. So with the FAMACHA system, we can look at the mucous membranes in the lower eyelid and determine anemia and make recommendations whether to deworm or not, whether they need it or not.
Brad, can you hit real quick about, I know some of our producers, we confuse when they have coccidiosis or they are really have a worm load problem. What is the difference, and what are the different symptoms from coccidiosis compared to issues with parasite overload?
Okay, the barber pole worm is not going to cause scours. If we see scours or diarrhea, dirty butts, then that's most likely a coccidia issue. And that's common in the younger animals. They will develop an immunity to coccidia over time, but those young animals haven't developed that yet. So most of our sheep feeds include a coccidiostat in them to keep those coccidia levels low. We can utilize some of those products in the feed. If we have an outbreak and a high population of coccidia, that's not going to treat them. That's not going to get rid of that problem. So at that point, then we have to administer some products to control the coccidia. And Corid is probably the most common one used. We can utilize it in drinking water to help decrease the coccidia load. The coccidia is mainly a sanitation issue. We've got to do the best we can at keeping feeders and waterers clean and keeping that at a low level.
Then typically for our worm or parasite issues, we get the either animals that are thin or bottle jaw or just unthrifty looking animals.
Right. The other key thing that our producers need to utilize is just body condition scoring animals. You know, a ewe should be getting thin when she's lactating and nursing twins or triplets. She's providing all that energy for that lamb growth. She's going to be getting thin. Think about the stage of production and the body condition score of that animal to help make some of those deworming decisions.
Yeah, and and I know that we should keep track of those for the body condition and for the. Can you remind the audience what are the numbers for body condition for sheep and goats?
Sheep and goats, we utilize different scales for beef cattle, for equine, for sheep and goats. Utilize a score of 1 to 5, with 1 being severely emaciated, 5 being extremely obese, and 1 is just as bad as the other. We see a lot of small producers with pet animals that have problems from overfeeding just as much as underfeeding. The ideal is a body condition score of 3. We want them to have some fat cover over the ribs. We need to palpate, feel with your hands over the rib cage and down the backbone, because especially on wool sheep, it's hard to visually see that body condition score.
Yeah, and Brad, there was. Oh, do we have any? Sorry, Evan. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Running out of time here.
Not that I see, but I did drop Brad's email and phone number in the chat, along with a fact sheet from Virginia Tech on the body condition scoring and how to go about reading that for yourself on your animals. Oh, here we go. Any advice on co-pasturing goats and sheep?
The goats and sheep normally will get along just fine. Behaviors are very similar. A lot of times your does are a little more aggressive, but normally it's not an issue. You don't see any advantage to co-pasturing goats and sheep from a parasite load wise, like we do other multi-species grazing options. If we put sheep with cattle or horses or larger animals, or rotate them one following the other, then the opposite species serves as a vacuum to vacuum up those parasite larvae, and they're not affected by it. Goats and sheep are affected by the same parasites pretty much, so we don't realize that advantage.
Okay. Oh, one more thing, Brad. Could you email those dates to Evan, and he will put them up on our for our Facebook.
Yep, I
and
sure
your
will.
phone. That way we can do some advertising. We are about running out of time, so
Real
again,
quick, let
go ahead,
me
Brad.
mention one other thing. The Shepherds Federation serves as our means of marketing wool in West Virginia. We're planning wool pools again for late August, early September timeframe. We haven't got dates hammered out yet, but I need to remind all of our producers that the Farm Service Agency does provide a loan deficiency payment for wool when the market is low. Right now, we have tremendous lamb and kid market, but the wool market is non-existent. The government payment through the Farm Service Agency, you need to sign up for before you lose possession of that lamb or wool. They pay for wool, and they pay an unshorn lamb payment as well. So if you're marketing lambs that haven't been shorn, you can sign up for those payments. Talk to your local Farm Service Agency representative.
Okay, that's good to know. Again, we want to thank Brad Smith from Grant County coming on the program, and he's got Evan has on our Facebook page his email and contact information. One last question, Brad. Of course, my dad always said there's two types of music. There's country and Western. So we need to know who your favorite country music artist is.
I like a lot of the older ones. You know, I like, probably one of my favorite is Chris Ledoux.
Chris Ledoux. Well, that's first. I think that's the first vote for Chris. Of course, was a big influence on Garth Brooks. Probably one of the greatest country music artists. Top selling anyways. Evan, our last